Dude, the amount of political capital and enthusiasm that Donald Trump burnt over this issue to then just result in supporting the release of the files, seemingly, it was such a self-inflicted wound where that he may never recover from, if I'm being completely honest, in my view. It's, I think, just undeniably proven now that Jeffrey Epstein was connected to Mossad.
Dave Smith just explained how Trump shot himself in the foot, utterly destroying himself and possibly the rest of his presidency over the Epstein scandal. Why he used every trick in the book to do that, even dragging political allies like Marjorie Taylor Greene on the subject, and what it means for the future of American politics, and what we already know in recent weeks about Epstein's ironclad connections to Israeli intelligence. Let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
And so as where we are right now, correct me if I'm wrong, I know you've been staying on top of this, but I believe the bill is on its way to Donald Trump's desk right now. So it has passed with overwhelming support, and it's on its way to Donald Trump's desk. And I guess we could talk all about this and some of the new revelations and what we think this is going to lead to going forward. But my first takeaway of all of this, you know, and kind of keeping up with the last few days where Trump kind of flipped and then said he was for, you know, like, I just don't know that I've ever seen an issue mishandled more by an administration. I mean, it's not even like, you know, there were certain things, like even when Obama had promised to close Guantanamo and then he kind of backed off closing Guantanamo, but like at least there was a bit of, I don't know, like a plausible, yeah, I thought this was a little bit easier before I was in office, but now that I got in there and have to deal with the logistics of it, it's not quite so easy to close it. Maybe I could reduce it by a little bit, but not close it completely. And obviously there were like things with Joe Biden's age where, obviously that was a bigger deal in some ways, but at the same time, it's like, okay, he was senile and we're lying and saying he's not. It's at least fairly straightforward what the thing is. But this dude, I mean, to go from like, I've just kind of never seen anything exactly like it. Donald Trump was able to harness this massive cultural energy that carried him to victory in 2024. And a big part of that was, well, obviously the drain the swamp spirit, but the Epstein stuff was one that like he talked about a lot. All of his men, like all of the king's men were on record. Pam Bondi, Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, you know, all of them were talking about releasing the Epstein stuff. They then pivot on a dime and Donald Trump tries to do his typical thing where like he goes, nah, it's a hoax. Here's a nickname for Marjorie Taylor Greene if you're talking about it. Thomas Massey's a loser, blah, blah. It just falls flat on its face.
It did. It fell flat on its face in every single way, even though he tried every trick in the book to cover it up for 11 months. He tried to call it a Democratic hoax. He said there was nothing there. He said it wasn't interesting. He tried to even bring up red herrings, like seeking grand jury testimony that wasn't pointing people in the direction that they wanted transparency in. And Dave's right. Kash Patel and Dan Bongino did talk about this endlessly in their quest to ascend to power in this new administration. And Trump, knowing they had said those things, elevated them to key positions. Same with Pam Bondi. And he was bleeding political capital ever since March, ever since that phase 1 Binders Gate, but really since July when they handed down that DOJ and FBI memo that said, nothing to see here, there will be no phase 2, there will be no releases. Epstein didn't engage in blackmail, he had no collaborators, they just said there's nothing here in every single way. And now Trump's been exposed as a liar, at the very least because the files exist, including the 20,000 documents that the House Oversight Committee just released a few weeks ago that have been poured over and themselves are very revealing. So yeah, Trump has squandered his second term, a lot of it. He might never recover.
Then the files didn't exist. Then we were stupid to be asking for them. Then the files did exist, but it was all kiddie porn, so we couldn't show you any of it. Then you know what I mean? Like, after they had done the whole thing with the binders and made this faux presentation, months later, they're telling you it was a Democratic hoax. This was like, this is a Russiagate type thing. And then finally to flip again after going to war with the best congressman in the country over his bill. At the last minute, Donald Trump is so politically defeated that he has to flip and support the release of the bill. I just like, dude, the amount of goddamn political capital and enthusiasm that Donald Trump burnt over this issue to then just result in supporting the release of the files, seemingly, which, you know, whatever we get into, they'll end up be missing or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like it's real, but like just the way to handle this, if you were going to end up here, he like, it was such a self-inflicted wound where that he may never recover from, if I'm being completely honest, in my view.
Yeah, I got to agree with that. This is a huge blunder, and it's going to affect him in serious ways. And even if this was a different issue, to have this mutiny within Congress, every Republican outside of Clay Higgins in Louisiana voting for this bill, including Mike Johnson, who, by the way, stormed away from a reporter today at the Capitol saying, "I'm so disgusted by this." And this is the release of information pertaining to a child sex trafficking ring, Jeffrey Epstein's connections to people of prominence. He's just disgusted by because he wanted amendments. And then he said, because it could be a threat to our political system. Well, what does that tell you? We know there's more here than the eye meets. That's exactly why there needs to be transparency in this. We need to know the truth, who Epstein was connected to, who did he work for, which intelligence agencies he was connected to, which is very well known at this point, at least some of them. There might be more that are even more embarrassing, but what naturally would be a political security risk to national security if the information got out about, you know, child molestation? How could that pertain to national security unless other countries were involved? And they clearly were, including America's greatest ally in the Middle East.
And no, I think Johnson voted for it. I believe I have to double check that, but I think he did. I think after Trump said he wanted him to, Johnson was like, well, all right, what can I do here now? But no, you're right. A huge win for Thomas Massie. And I thought it was a great example, you know, because it seemed to me that, you know, I don't know if you saw it when Thomas Massie straight up said, he made this like call to action to his fellow congressmen. And he goes, hey, to all my Republicans out there, like, Donald Trump's the president for 3 more years. He's not here after that. And so he might save you in your midterm election right now in a red district, but he won't even be able to help you in 5-6 years. And you're going to be on record having protected pedophiles. And I do think there was something about that it seemed to move the needle. It seemed like it was shortly after that Trump kind of caved and a lot of the Republicans started caving. And it's, you know, if that's the case that did move the needle, it does kind of like show you how much you can kind of bully other politicians with something like this. I mean, I think it's like when you said what a win for Thomas Massie. Yeah, how would it even be a loss? Even if the files don't reveal anything, okay, he was trying to get a pedophile's files released. Like, what, you know, he was trying to get down to the bottom of it. And
that's what makes the attempts to destroy Thomas Massie so disingenuous and so absurd, by the way, that is what he was digging his heels in, to get the truth about child sex trafficking and child molestation and Epstein's connections to people of prominence to light. That's why Trump and his minions brought the House against Massie. That's why Miriam Adelson, in combination with, you know, Massie's opposition to the Israel First mentality and aid to Israel, that's why Miriam Adelson's dedicating up to $20 million to take him out in a primary. By the way, it's all so obvious, and anyone following this can see this, but Thomas Massie ends up looking heroic. So does Marjorie Taylor Greene. So does Nancy Mason, Lauren Boebert, by the way, both of which I disagree with completely on the Israel issue. But those two were heroic in digging their heels into and resisting a pressure campaign by Trump and Vance to get Boebert to not vote for this. But it seemed to be in the very end that there was going to be at least 100 Republican mutinies on this, and that alone would have made Trump look horrible. That's why Trump, his hand was forced. He had no choice but to say, oh, I guess I support this now. I have nothing to hide. When in reality, he did everything to prevent this. And having so many Republicans mutiny against him on this vote would have looked even worse than it looks now. And it looks pretty bad right now. And that is notwithstanding anything that comes out of these files, which, yeah, will be heavily redacted and classified and hidden from the public. But nonetheless, this is an important story to pursue, and Massie's a hero.
If they do release anything of value, then then it's a huge victory that you can never take away from. But it does just remind you, like, almost in a way, like, dude, if Thomas Massey, if a congressman from Kentucky who's at war with the president who's in his own political party, if he can move the needle with Congress just by, like, rhetorically move the needle with them, just imagine what Donald Trump could have done over the last year. Like, for all the talk of all this shit about how, like, border funding was held hostage with all the other spending. What Donald Trump couldn't have just come in and said, Congress, you get me a standalone border bill right now. And any Republican who doesn't vote for that is against border security. He could have just made them do all. Dude, he could have cut $2 trillion out of the federal budget just by saying, hey, guys, that's it. We're balancing. We're getting toward a balanced budget here.
Absolutely. There's no excuses otherwise. He could have accomplished all of his best campaign pledges, actually ended U.S. involvement in Ukraine day one, decided not to launch new wars like he did in Iran and is now flirting with in Venezuela and continues in Yemen. He wouldn't have to do that. He could literally gut the welfare state with his political capital among his base. He could whip them to support that. He won't, because they don't want that. He could end the worst excesses, and he could engage in mass deportations if he wanted, with 2 houses of Congress supporting him and all the political capital and cult of personality around him, and how much he had his base whipped to do that, with only people like Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene being outliers on only a few select issues, some of which don't even include those things which they would be on board with. He could have accomplished a lot, but they don't want to do it. Why? It's a systematic issue. The lobbies are in control. The Israel lobby, the banking lobby, the military-industrial complex, big tech, big regulatory industries. They're in control. No matter who you elect, you get the same people. So yeah, what Massey did is heroic, and it really says a lot of what a tireless minority can actually get accomplished in Washington if it isn't evil and malevolent and it actually has character and integrity.
Give me a budget with $2 trillion missing and I will sign it, and forced him to. But of course, he doesn't have the desire or the wherewithal to do any of that. Again, this is all speculating, but, like, there was something about the energy at which Donald Trump seemed almost flustered with the Epstein thing that, like, he did. Like, it was such a thing where they're just like, we're going to release this file, everything on this file. We're going to show you exactly what it is. What file? What? No, there was no file. That was a Democrat hoax. What do you like, it was like this, like, very weird thing. And now at first, I think my inclination was kind of to speculate the way Thomas Massey was, like, because I do have a thing, despite how some people might mischaracterize us, we're actually really not kooks, me and you. Like, we don't really jump to conspiracies. You always kind of, in your mind, you're like, well, if there's a less salacious answer here, let's go with that first. You know what I mean? Like, okay, it doesn't mean. I will say, with some of the emails that have been released, and I'm not just talking about the Bubba one, because who the hell knows? We can hear from, we will hear from Jeffrey Epstein's brother in a few moments here. But particularly, I mean, maybe, and look, part of this is because I'm not, like, the world's greatest expert on the Jeffrey Epstein story. Like, as I've talked about on the show before, I listen to Daryl Cooper's podcast on the Martyr Made show about it. I listened to his podcast with Tucker. I've read probably like a dozen or 24 articles about it, but, like, that's it. That's really not, like, it's not like it is a story that I know super, super well. And so I guess I really did not realize how connected and how late in the game Jeffrey Epstein was still so connected in the Trump circle. Like, just seeing a lot of the emails, like, oh, I didn't realize that, like, oh, this is in 2018. He's talking about meeting with Bannon and what, other dirt. It was like, oh, Trump was in the White House already. This is many years after Jeffrey Epstein was popped, you know what I mean, and convicted for soliciting underage prostitution. So, like, I guess it just, not even saying, say, the most salacious thing there, not making any claims, it just does seem like, oh, it seemed a lot more likely that there's stuff that's embarrassing for Trump. I mean, look, at the very least, to be like, if it comes out that you actually were this involved with a guy who was running a sex trafficking ring, and you knew, I mean, it was known at this point. This was like not back in the day. We're like, oh, I thought he was just a philanthropist or like an investment banker. I didn't realize he was doing all this. Like, oh, no, you realize this has been out. There's court documents about it. For him to be that closely involved is at the very least, it looks horrible.
It does look horrible, and only the optics look horrible even if Trump isn't implicated in Epstein's crimes. It seems more likely to me that the embarrassment that he's so concerned about is the connections between Epstein and Israel, which many have come out, but probably not all. You know, and if he was engaged in Epstein's sexual offenses, I mean, I think that's possible, but it's also hard for me to believe that Epstein wouldn't have sent pictures to Michael Wolff, who he was in close correspondence with, actual blackmail of Trump, showing Trump in compromising positions, despite the fact that he was talking with Michael Wolff about how they could blackmail Trump, given his answers to an interview that was going to happen in, I believe, 2016, and also working with Stacey Plaskett, the Democratic delegate from the Virgin Islands, in a hearing trying to stick it to Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, that she was texting back and forth with him, and he was trying to help her smash Trump's legal representation. But I'm supposed to still believe that he didn't give compromising pictures to her, or journalists, or Landon Thomas from the New York Times, who he was talking to, and he said, hey, do you want to see pictures of Trump with women in bikinis? And Landon Thomas said yes. And then there's no record of him ever getting that. And Landon Thomas hasn't divulged any pictures like that. So I tend to think the more embarrassing thing that Trump is worried about, if not protecting for other people in his orbit, is Epstein's connections to Israel, because we know more about that. Those are concrete. And that's just speculation. I'm open to all possibilities. We'll probably never get the full answers, just like in JFK, but that's what I'm thinking.
And so I don't know. It's not to say that that is the motivation or that that's the only motivation, but it certainly seems like a very plausible one. But then the other thing that's really blown wide open on this, and this is before anything having to do with Thomas Massie. This was the drop sites, great reporting that Ryan Grimm broke a few weeks ago. But it is like, you really can't like overstate how big a deal that was, because essentially, up until those recent email leaks that Ryan Grimm published, the evidence that, say, he had connections to Israeli intelligence or something like that was always circumstantial. Now, it was overwhelming circumstantial evidence that left you in a position where you were like, well, dude, what the hell? I mean, like, okay, like, you've got, look, let's just look at it, okay? You've got a Jewish guy who ends up like unexplainably rising up the ranks at Bear Stearns and getting right up to the very, very top of finance and managing finances for like the most powerful people. He links up with the daughter of a Mossad spy and then starts running like a sex trafficking ring where he has the prime minister of Israel popping over to his apartment on a regular basis and staying there for extended periods of time. And okay, so like even say just that, and there's more to it, but like even just that, you go like, oh, like the daughter of a Mossad spy and you're friends with the Israeli prime minister, like there's this connect. But so it was like, and I think you could say that like maybe some of us got a little out over our skis. Like I know there was one time I said on a podcast where I was like, we know Epstein was Mossad. And then I said later, I was like, okay, I guess maybe like I overstated that a bit, but it did seem like, but now we've got actual emails of him trying to connect foreign diplomats with Mossad agents, working with them on how to approach Mossad. Like now the connection, there's actual tangible hard evidence for this. And so at the very least, it's, I think, just undeniably proven now that Jeffrey Epstein was connected to Mossad.
Yeah, without a doubt, it is proven. It has been proven for weeks now. And if, we lived in a true era in which journalism reigned and important stories were prominently featured and put in front of the American populace, this would be the biggest story in American history or close to it. Maybe the biggest story in the decade outside of, Trump's political comeback or whatever. But this is a major story, and there are 5 connections that Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussein have uncovered. I've talked about it a little bit on Twitter, but let's run down the 5, including the most recent, which might be the most interesting. So number 1, it's definitively proven via correspondence that was leaked with Ehud Barak that Epstein was directly involved in brokering a security arrangement between Israel and Mongolia. And in another case, he brokered a security arrangement on behalf of Israel between Israel and the Ivory Coast. Number 3, he drafted at least one full speech for Ehud Barak while Ehud Barak was the defense minister in Israel. He had already finished his term as prime minister and head of IDF intelligence, but Epstein drafted a full speech for Ehud Barak. Number 4, Epstein was securing a wire transfer and confirming banking information with one of Israel's top spies, Yoni Koren. Up until the very end, we have emails showing that they were working together to do this wire transfer, transferring money to a known spy in Israel. And then number 4, we have this recent story, again by the heroic Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussein at Dropsite News, talking about Jeffrey Epstein's attempt to pursue Swiss Rothschild Bank to finance Israeli cyber weapons empire. Essentially, he was trying to procure funding from this Rothschild Bank for Israeli cyber weapons. And this story just hit the presses yesterday. It's really interesting. Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussein have done incredible work on this. And it's detailed with documents, actual visuals of the emails, including this one talking about that. And it's just undeniable. It's so undeniable. So those of us that were called conspiracy theorists for daring to say that Epstein clearly had a connection to Israel and he was working with Israel have been definitively proven correct. So, whether Dave was out over his skis on saying Epstein was Mossad, we know he's an Israeli asset now. That's exactly what he was. All this proves it. And all of it should be publicized. But look at this. This is not the top story in the country. This only has 600 likes. I think some of their other stories have a lot more. But this is truly interesting. And you have his direct quote here. Direct quote here talking about this financing scheme on behalf of Israel. Right here. I highlighted it on the other screen. But that's what we have. It's definitively proven. And you know what? Dave's right. Trump truly did shoot himself on the foot on this. And even if he isn't directly involved in Epstein's crimes, it sure looks like either he is, he's covering for people close to him, he's embarrassed about what might be yielded in terms of Epstein's connections to intelligence agencies, which we already know about, but they might run far deeper than what we have, maybe even connections to the CIA. And that would explain Mike Johnson's assertion that this is a risk to the political system. Well, you're kind of giving away the game there, Mike Johnson, if it's a national security risk, because why would it be otherwise unless Epstein was connected to other countries where, providing that evidence would be embarrassing to the United States? Well, guess what? I want that embarrassment. I want the embarrassment of what this was, a blackmail operation on the part of Israel using Epstein to lure in people of prominence, get them in compromising positions, and using it to blackmail them on behalf of the Israeli government, which it really looks like a lot of this was. And we might never get the answers on that. But either way, it shows what's possible from people of character and virtue in Washington, even if they are outnumbered by the establishment in either party, as Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene were. Even if they're going against the president, as Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene were. That's what we're getting out of this. But what do you think? I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. Is Dave Smith right about this? What does this mean for Trump's political future? Is he just done? Is unaffordability still going to be the biggest issue? Can he get away from this in any way? Are they just going to redact everything and classify everything? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Dave. Awesome video, Dave. Great take. Pretty much agreed down the line on this. And if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. And if you do that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. You'll be able to see those members only videos that are on my channel right away if you do that. I really appreciate your support if you go to that length to help me out. And also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below, plug in your email, I'll send it right to you in PDF form. No cost, no obligation, just because I want to do that for you as a gift. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.